afternoon. I'm Jenny Beth Martin with Tea Party Patriots Action. Welcome to this week's Lunch Break Live with Tea Party Patriots. In just a moment, we're going to go to Bill Pascoe for our Washington report. Before we do that, I want to give you a quick call to action in case you have to drop off early so that you've got the call to action for the next several days, and also ask you to share this Facebook Live session with your Facebook friends so they can get the call to action and the Washington report. So for the call to action this week, we saw last night that the Senate dropped the amnesty and open border bill. What I heard Senator Mike Lee calling the border never closes bill. And we've got to make calls to action to the Senate, or we've got to make phone calls to the Senate to tell our United States senators, both senators, to vote no on this awful bill. It will give amnesty to people who are coming here illegally, and it will open the borders and codify open borders. We absolutely must stop this bill. Thankfully, in the House, Speaker Johnson and also Majority Leader Scalise have said that the bill is dead on arrival in the House. They will not bring it to the floor for a vote. That's great, and we really appreciate that. And later this week, we may need to make phone calls to the House to keep them strong. But for the time being, the Senate has the ability to stop this bill if 41 Republicans vote against cloture, and that's what we need to be urging them to do. Vote against cloture, vote against the bill, and it needs to just stop over on the Senate side altogether. Now we're going to go to Bill Pascoe for our Washington report, and then I'll come back and give you a little more detail on the call to action.
Thank you, Jenny Beth. The House will return Monday and stay in session through Wednesday. The Senate will return Monday and stay in session through Thursday, or possibly longer. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Last week in the House came back on Monday and voted to pass two bills under suspension of the rules. On Tuesday, the House took up a rule and had a problem. 4 New York Republicans, unhappy over the fact that a tax bill appeared to be ready to go without expanding the state and local taxes deduction, as they had promised their constituents they would do, were so unhappy that they initially cast their votes against the rule. The rule was held open while they negotiated with leadership. Eventually, they returned to the floor and switched their votes back to yes. Consequently, the rule passed on a straight party line vote, 216 to 210. Then the House took up H.R. 5585, the Agent Raul Gonzalez Officer Safety Act. After considering and rejecting an amendment, the House passed the bill by a vote of 271 to 154. On Wednesday, the House took up H.R. 6678, the Consequences for Social Security Fraud Act. After considering and adopting an amendment, the House voted to pass the bill by a vote of 272 to 155. Then the House took up H.R. 6679, the No Immigration Benefits for Hamas Terrorists Act, and passed it by a vote of 422 to 2. Yes, there were 2 Democrats who voted against a bill to prohibit admission into the United States of members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad or Hamas, or who participated in or otherwise facilitated the October 7, 2023 attacks on Israel, or officers, representatives, and spokespersons of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. The 2 Democrats were Cori Bush of Missouri and Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, both members of the Squad. Then the House passed a bill under suspension of the rules, and then the House took up H.R. 7024, the so-called Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act, which should more properly have been named the Republicans' Cave to Democrats on Welfare Expansion in Exchange for Some Business Tax Breaks Act. Under suspension of the rules, because it wouldn't have been able to get to the floor under regular order, the bill passed by a vote of 357 to 70. With 47 Republicans and 23 Democrats voting against it. We'll talk more about this bill in a moment. On Thursday, the House took up and passed H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act, by a vote of 275 to 150. And then they were done. This week in the House will return on Monday, with the first vote set for 6:30 p.m. At that time, the House is scheduled to take up 9 bills under suspension of the rules. The House may also take up a resolution, still unnumbered, to censure Representative Ilhan Omar, sponsored by Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene. On Tuesday and Wednesday, the House will consider H.Res. 863, impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and H.R. 485, the Protecting Health Care for All Patients Act of 2023. In addition, the Speaker on Saturday afternoon added to the floor schedule for this week a supplemental spending bill to send $17.6 billion to Israel. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Last week in the Senate returned on Tuesday and voted to confirm Joshua Paul Kolar to be a U.S. Circuit Judge for the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. On Wednesday, the Senate voted to confirm Kirk Edward Sheriff to be a U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of California and Carolyn Mihalchik to be a U.S. District Judge for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. Then the Senate voted to invoke cloture on and then to confirm the nomination of Joseph Goffman to be an Assistant Administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency. On Thursday, the Senate voted to invoke cloture on the nominations of Lisa W. Wang and Joseph Albert Lorosky, Jr., both to be a judge of the U.S. Court of International Trade. Then the Senate voted to confirm Lisa W. Wang to that position, and then they were done. This week in the Senate will return Monday with the first vote set for 5:30 p.m. At that time, the Senate will proceed to a roll call vote on the nomination of Joseph Albert Lorosky, Jr. to be a judge of the United States Court of International Trade. Then, based on the Majority Leader's cloture filings, I anticipate we'll see votes on the nominations of Kurt Campbell to be Deputy Secretary of State and Amy M. Baggio to be U.S. District Judge for the District of Oregon. And I expect we'll see a procedural vote Wednesday to see if the emergency supplemental spending bill can advance. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Schedule-wise, there's talk that if Leader Schumer can succeed in getting the Senate to take up the bill, the Senate may stay in session as long as it takes to pass the bill. That would require them to give up some time from a planned 2-week recess that is set to begin at the end of this week. Now to Lloyd Austin. At the beginning of January, we began this update by noting that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin had been hospitalized for almost a week without telling his colleagues at the White House or the Pentagon. On Thursday of last week, more than 4 weeks after going undercover, he held his first press briefing to discuss the circumstances that led to his disappearance from public sight and from the chain of command. It was Austin's first formal press briefing in 2 years. He said he received the diagnosis of his prostate cancer as a gut punch and said he decided on his own not to tell the president, in part because he didn't want to add to all the things that he's got on his plate. Austin said that decision was a mistake. Quote, "I want to be crystal clear. We did not handle this right. I did not handle this right. It is probably not an issue of secrecy as much as it's an issue of privacy," end quote. He said he did not order his staff to keep his cancer diagnosis secret. Austin had undergone surgery for the prostate cancer before Christmas. On the evening of Monday, January 1, he was taken by ambulance from his home to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center because he said he was in severe pain. He was admitted to the hospital's ICU. The Pentagon did not notify the White House until Thursday of that week because Austin's chief of staff was out sick. Now to that tax bill. Virtually out of nowhere, the House on Wednesday passed a $78 billion welfare bill disguised as a tax bill. The bill passed by a vote of 357 to 70, with 169 Republicans voting in favor and 47 against, and 188 Democrats voting in favor and just 23 against. The fact that more Democrats voted for the bill and more Republicans voted against the bill should give you an idea of how bad this bill is, which leaves the obvious question, how did this thing move through a Republican-controlled House? It was negotiated over the last several months by House Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith and Senate Finance Chairman Ron Wyden. Smith is a Republican from Missouri. Wyden is a Democrat from Oregon. Smith is the youngest Ways and Means chairman ever, and he's been chairman of the committee since January of 2023. You want to know how this bill passed the House? Jason Smith got rolled by Ron Wyden, and then Smith rolled his fellow Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee, which marked up the bill and reported it out of committee by a vote of 40 to 3, with all 3 no votes coming from Democrats. Here's what's in the bill. In the words of the Wall Street Journal, the bill, quote, would turbocharge cash subsidies in the child tax credit through 2025 in exchange for business provisions such as bonus depreciation for equipment. Mr. Smith gave Mr. Wyden a down payment on making the child credit a universal basic income. We've explained at length how the tax bill's income redistribution via child tax credit isn't worth the business deductions. The larger tax credit checks aren't seen merely as the price of doing business with Democrats, but as tax relief for working families, according to Republicans. The changes to the credit are not tax relief, but cash checks to those who don't owe any income tax. And the GOP knows it. Of the new credit's $33.5 billion cost, some $30.6 billion is spending, says the Joint Committee on Taxation. Kim Strassel makes it even clearer, quote, the beating heart of Wednesday's package is 2 longtime Democratic priorities, increasing the size of the child tax credit and its availability to parents who don't pay income tax. She continues, we're all for families now, and that's the justification for robbing the paychecks of productive childless taxpayers and rerouting their earnings to non-working parents. This bill would further discourage work, leaving more parents and children dependent on government largesse. In exchange, Chairman Smith got Democrats to support 3 business-oriented tax provisions, including allowing corporations to deduct more of their interest expenses, which reverses a policy win from the Trump 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And the kicker? The bill allows illegal aliens to claim the child tax credit. Children born in the United States to parents who are illegal aliens are nevertheless considered U.S. citizens and can apply for and receive Social Security cards. Once they have a Social Security number, their parents can apply for the child tax credit. When confronted with this, Chairman Smith called it completely false and said that, quote, it's the same language that was in Trump's tax cuts of 2017, end quote. Well, yes, it is. But that doesn't make it false. That just means the mistake was originally made in 2017 in the Trump tax cut bill. But it's still there. The bill now moves to the Senate, where Republicans, not even the ranking member of the Senate Finance Committee, had no input on the bill, and where they may have a thing or two to say about it. Now to the Mayorkas impeachment. It only seemed as if it took forever. Last Wednesday, the House Homeland Security Committee met to mark up 2 articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. The meeting lasted all through the day and well into the evening, but it eventually ended after both articles of impeachment were passed on straight party line votes. The first article of impeachment alleges willful and systemic refusal to comply with the law. The second article of impeachment alleges breach of public trust. The resolution, H-Res 863, has been teed up for a vote in the House Rules Committee on Monday afternoon. That's a sign the House leadership plans to put it on the floor Tuesday or possibly Wednesday. Now to the emergency supplemental. Senate Majority Leader Schumer promised to release bill text for the emergency supplemental spending bill by Sunday. While we waited, Speaker Johnson decided to get ahead of the curve. On Saturday afternoon, he announced that the House would vote this week on a clean, standalone bill containing nothing but spending for military assistance for Israel, $17.6 billion worth to be exact. According to a summary provided by the House Appropriations Committee, the military assistance breaks down as follows. $4 billion to replenish Iron Dome and David Sling missile defense systems. $1.2 billion for the Iron Dome defense system to counter short-range rockets and mortar threats. $3.5 billion for the procurement of advanced weapons systems, defense articles, and defense services through the Foreign Military Financing Program. And $1 billion to enhance production and development of artillery and critical munitions. In addition, we will ensure our support for Israel does not compromise U.S. readiness by providing $4.4 billion to replenish defense articles and defense services already provided to Israel, and $3.3 billion for current U.S. military operations in the region in response to the October 7th attack. You may recall that 3 months ago, as one of the first pieces of legislation he passed as Speaker, Speaker Johnson passed through the House a bill providing $14.6 billion in military assistance to Israel, paid for by rescinding money that had already been appropriated for the IRS. Democrats screamed bloody murder at the time. It was an emergency supplemental, they said, and that meant the funds didn't have to be offset. In other words, Democrats insisted, because they hadn't budgeted at the start of the year for this spending, we should just be able to borrow the money and tack it onto the national debt. Speaker Johnson thought otherwise and offered a way to pay for the money to be redirected to Israel. Well, that bill went nowhere in the Senate. So this time, Speaker Johnson didn't offer an offset for the Democrats to complain about. As he wrote in a letter to his Republican colleagues Saturday in announcing this legislation, quote, "During debate in the House and in numerous subsequent statements, Democrats made clear that their primary objection to the original House bill was with its offsets. The Senate will no longer have excuses, however misguided, against swift passage of this critical support for our ally," end quote. Not surprisingly, the House Freedom Caucus objected to the Speaker's decision to remove the pay-for. On Sunday afternoon, the caucus released a statement that said, quote, "The most principled action taken to date by Speaker Johnson was the decision to pass a standalone, fully paid-for Israel funding bill in November, demonstrating our commitment to supporting our most important ally in a fiscally responsible manner. It is extremely disappointing that the Speaker is now surrendering to perceived pressure to move an even larger but now unpaid-for Israel aid package, reversing course on his stance to require new supplemental spending to be offset," end quote. On Sunday evening at 6:40 p.m., in other words, about as late Sunday as they could release the text and still say they held to their promise to release the text no later than Sunday, Senate leaders released the text of the 370-page emergency supplemental spending bill. I'm not going to take the time here to go into the weeds on the text of the bill for the simple reason that Speaker Johnson tweeted shortly thereafter, quote, "I've seen enough. This bill is even worse than we expected and won't come close to ending the border catastrophe." As the lead Democrat negotiator proclaimed, quote, "Under this legislation, the border never closes. If this bill reaches the House, it will be dead on arrival," end quote. Now to the latest on the Biden crime family saga. The chairman of the 3 House committees tasked with conducting the impeachment inquiry against President Biden, the Ways and Means Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Oversight and Government Accountability Committee, are growing increasingly frustrated with the White House counsel's office and its stonewalling of committee document requests. On Wednesday of last week, the 3 committee chairmen wrote to the White House counsel and threatened that if he didn't produce documents by Wednesday, they'd send him a subpoena for the documents. The documents in question are simple and get right to the heart of a major avenue of investigation. The committees want all speech drafts produced between November 1, 2015 and December 9, 2015, of the speech given by then Vice President Biden to the Ukrainian parliament on December 9, 2015. According to media reports, Biden called an audible on U.S. policy toward Ukraine during that trip. That is, he unexpectedly shifted policy to include a demand that the Ukrainian president remove from office the Ukrainian prosecutor general or risk the $1 billion in U.S. loan guarantees that Biden was carrying with him on that trip. The committees first requested the speech drafts on August 17 of last year. The National Archives and Records Administration told the committees that it had gathered together all the documents responsive to this request within 1 week, but that the White House counsel's office had requested that the National Archives not send the documents to the committees while it reviewed the request. That delay has now stretched for more than 5 months, and the committees are getting frustrated, hence the threat of subpoenas. Also on Wednesday, the Oversight Committee announced that James Biden, brother of President Biden, has agreed to come to Capitol Hill on February 21 for a private interview with committee members and staff. That's 1 week before Hunter Biden is scheduled to appear for a similar private deposition with members and staff. Now to the latest on the Trump indictments. With respect to the Trump indictments, 3 things of note occurred on Friday. First, House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan subpoenaed Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis for all records regarding potential federal funding of her investigation into and case against former President Trump. He first asked her to provide such documentation last summer, but received no response. He followed up with several more letters requesting the documentation over the last several months, but continued to receive no response. So Friday, he made the request more significant by accompanying them with official subpoenas. Second, Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis acknowledged having what she called a personal relationship with Nathan Wade, the independent lawyer she had hired to serve as special counsel in her case against former President Trump. Several weeks ago, one of President Trump's co-defendants had filed legal paperwork alleging Willis had been having a clandestine affair with Nathan Wade, the lawyer she hired, at a cost to county taxpayers of $653,000 to serve as special counsel. According to documents recently revealed as part of Wade's divorce case, he paid for Willis's air travel on multiple occasions on trips she took with him. Trump's co-defendant alleges that this improper relationship disqualifies the two of them from further service in the matter. That is now under review. Third, Federal District Judge Tanya Chutkan ordered President Trump's planned March 4 trial date taken off the calendar, a formal acknowledgement of what we've all known for some time, that President Trump's claim of presidential immunity from criminal prosecution would delay his trial on election interference while his claim is still being adjudicated. Quote, "The court will set a new schedule if and when the mandate is returned," end quote, wrote the judge in the brief order she released Friday. That makes it much more likely that the first criminal trial for Trump will be the Manhattan District Attorney's case against him for business fraud in connection with hush money payments. The tentative trial date on that trial is still March 25, and the judge there has scheduled a pretrial hearing for February 15. Now to the Supreme Court and the question of Trump ballot access. At 10 a.m. on Thursday morning, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case to decide whether or not Donald Trump's name can be placed on the Republican primary ballot in Colorado. The Colorado Supreme Court ruled that he was ineligible for the ballot because he had violated a clause of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution that bars certain people who engaged in insurrection from serving in government positions. We've talked at length about this matter previously. I expect the court will make quick work of the decision. I also expect Chief Justice Roberts to do everything he can to find a way to get all the other justices to agree to a unanimous decision striking Colorado's action. And finally, to the Jenny Beth Show. Episode 51 of the Jenny Beth Show dropped last Wednesday. It features Jenny Beth's conversation with former Arizona Congressman Trent Franks, who's running for Congress again. As always, it's highly recommended. And that's our Washington Report for this week.
Bill, thank you so much for that Washington Report. Now, one more time for the call to action, we're asking you to call both of your United States senators and tell them to vote against the amnesty and open border bill. They must vote no for this bill, and we also want them to vote against cloture. There's no voting for the bill before you vote against the bill. We don't want any of that. 41 Republicans can kill the bill by preventing cloture on the bill, and that's what we need to see happen. For reasons why we think it is important, you can check out what I posted on X last night with the accounts that I linked to who have been following the bill closely. Let me go through a few of those for you, and I'm just going to glance at my Twitter feed as I'm doing that. So the first account, of course, is Senator Mike Lee. You can check his X postings by going to Based Mike Lee. Based Mike Lee. And he has amazing posts on it because he's telling what's wrong with the bill, and then he's doing a screenshot of the actual text and highlighting the portion that he's referencing. So you see in plain English what the screenshot means and why it's a problem. So I highly recommend that you follow his feed on Twitter. Then the next one to follow is the Immigration Accountability Project. This is an organization run by Rosemary Jinks. Many who've been fighting against amnesty for many years, know Rosemary Jinks. She's been amazing. She helps us stay informed. When I'm not sure what's going on when it comes to immigration, I reach out to her, and she always is very good at explaining what is happening. Her account, the Immigration Accountability Project, was referenced on Fox News and I think on Laura Ingram's show on Fox News with the 5 things that would be in the bill. And then these senators were going around, and Senate staff were saying that it was misinformation and Russian bots and just all bashing the 5 items that the Immigration Accountability Project posted on X. Well, as it turns out, they were right. They knew it was in the bill. Their sources were good, and it actually showed up in the bill. So they're very solid. They have good sources on Capitol Hill, and I highly recommend, if you're not following them, follow them. You can find a link to their account by going to my account on X. Go to x.com/JennyBethM, x.com/JennyBethM, as in Martin. And then I've got all of these listed. So Mike Lee, the Immigration Accountability Project. The next one is M. Howell Tweets. That would be Mike Howell. And he is at Heritage and is in charge of their oversight project. And I highly recommend that you follow him. And he also was tweeting about what was in the bill last night, on Sunday night, as soon as the bill dropped. And finally, I recommend following Greg Price. Greg Price works for the State Freedom Caucus Network, and he has a lot of good information that you might want to follow as well, related to the immigration bill and also related to other items that are happening on Capitol Hill and around the entire country. Now, back to the bill. Follow Mike Lee's bill. His X account, and he points out that it takes 41 senators to kill this in the Senate. So that is where that information is coming from. The next thing that I want to point out is that Rick Scott highlighted last night, and several other senators and congressmen did as well, that the author of the bill, Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy, in his own words, says that the border never closes. The border never closes. Those were his own words. And the whole problem we have right now is that there is a surge going on in the border. People are coming through the legal entry points, claiming asylum, whether they qualify or not, and just immediately being let into our country. That is a huge problem. We need to stop that. And one way to stop it is to close the border and pause that kind of immigration until we get a handle on what has already happened and the people coming through our country right now. I don't mean that if you're doing business in south of the border and coming back in, and that is a regular part of your business, you shouldn't be able to come back and forth. But the way that the new people who are coming in to stay in the country are coming, that needs to close. And they're coming from all over the world, going to Central and South America, traveling through Mexico to get to our southern border. They're flying in from around the world to come up through our southern border. And they know if they went through an airport, if they went to JFK or Hartsfield International Airport in Atlanta, that there's no way that they would be able to go on through customs on an airplane. They're coming through the southern border because they know that the law is lax and not being followed in the southern border. That is completely wrong. And the border does need to close right now while we can't get a handle and get control again of the southern border. Absolutely horrible. The senator who wrote the bill, Chris Murphy, says it never closes. Huge problem. And so make sure that you note that that has happened. The other thing is that Stephen Miller, remember, Stephen Miller worked for President Trump in the White House for 4 years, for the entirety of President Trump's presidency. He supported him ahead of him ever becoming president. And he now has a legal foundation, America First Legal Foundation. Before he worked for President Trump, he used to work for a senator from Alabama, and he worked very hard on fighting amnesty for years. And so he is very, very strong on fighting immigration, or not fighting immigration, but fighting amnesty and standing for legal immigration and fighting illegal immigration. So I recommend that you follow him on X as well, and follow America First Legal Foundation. And those are the accounts that I highly recommend that you follow. We'll be posting, if we have more urgent calls to action, we'll probably be posting those on X and sharing them on other social media networks, but mostly on X. So make sure you're following me, Jenny Beth M. Now, the call to action, one more time, is to call both of your United States senators, tell them to vote against the amnesty and open border bill, vote against cloture for it, and vote against the bill. If it winds up going to the floor, vote against it on the floor. Absolutely not. We want them to vote against this bill. You can call today on Monday. You can call again on Tuesday, and then again on Wednesday morning. And then we'll see what happens after Wednesday. The bill is supposed to be voted on right now, or begin being voted on Wednesday. I'm not sure if that is what will ultimately happen or not, but for right now, we need to call, and we need to call every single day. And then we'll see where it takes us, and we'll have additional updates on our website and also on my Twitter feed at Jenny Beth M. Thank you so much for engaging in this issue. You've been strong. You've stood against amnesty several different times in the past. We helped defeat the Gang of Eight bill back in 2013 and 2014. We have to do this again. It's exhausting. It's sort of like whack-a-mole. It comes up, that game that you play in arcades, and it just keeps coming up, and you have to just keep punching it back down. That's what we're going to have to do this time. We'll do it again. And we're up for the challenge. Let's do everything we can to make sure that amnesty and open borders are not codified with this bill that's in the United States Senate. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today. And if you have any questions, as always, you can email me at jenny.beth@teapartypatriots.org. Jenny, Jenny, .beth, BETH, @teapartypatriots.org. Thank you.